Welcome back to this episode of the Deep Penetration Podcast. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Danny, and I am a self-esteem and love coach that works with the LGBTQ plus community. I work a lot with gay and bisexual men when it comes to all matters of self-esteem, self-identity, navigating love, and healthy relationships, and all of that good stuff. So if this is your first time listening in, watching the podcast, welcome. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. It helps me to continue to do what I love to do, which is to sit here and talk to you guys and unpack a lot of these stereotypes that we have within the queer community, and really helping people to understand that having a healthy, sustainable relationship is absolutely possible. That being said, I wanted to get right into the topic for today, which is meeting his parents. And I've already done an episode on this before, but that episode was more so about like the do's, right? So things that you should do, things that you should prepare for when you are going to be meeting his parents for the first time. But this one is the don'ts, right? Things that you should not do when you are meeting his parents for the first time. And look, meeting your partner's parents can be terrifying, right? So, especially if you're in a same-sex relationship, it's natural, generally speaking, to feel nervous and to feel anxious, but it's important to remember that your partner's parents, they're just people, right? And as a love and a self-esteem coach, I get how important this experience is and the impact it can have on your relationship. Often there is a fear when meeting your partner's parents, and it's possibly due to the desire to be accepted and all of those things. And as someone who identifies as queer, you are probably all too familiar with rejection and invalidation and discrimination and stereotyping and judgment. And to be honest with you, what I found is that a lot of that comes from authority figures or peers, which contributes to this kind of negative self-image and the desire to win the respect and admiration of people that we don't even know. So if you had a negative experience coming out to your parents or family or friends, it's likely that you will probably have some anxiety around meeting your partner's parents. For me, I always recommend taking a step back and reflecting on your emotions before the big day. And if you are feeling triggered, right? If you're feeling anxious or fearful, or like you just don't want to do this, dig a little deeper, right? And try to discover why. If you have not dealt with your own personal traumas, it is important that you are at least aware of them so that you are not leading with your emotions. So often when we allow ourselves to lead with emotion, we make irrational decisions. And it's not because it's bad to have emotions or to feel. No, that's not what I'm saying at all, right? Feelings are important. Emotions are important. It's almost like a gauge within yourself, a temperature reading, if you will, so that you are essentially, what emotions really kind of help you do is they help you be present in the moment, right? So understanding where those emotions are coming from and trying to connect them with what the thought process is. Allowing yourself to process your emotions in a healthy way can be beneficial instead of detrimental to you, right? So if you allow your emotions to just kind of run rampant, you can get sucked into your own personal feelings, right, around authority figures. But keep in mind, they are your partner's parents and may very well surprise you in a good way. So I think it's common for, let me put it this way. when there is a general fear of meeting your partner's parents for the first time, and this is based on the information that I have gathered from multitudes, many, many different client sessions that I've had, and my own personal experiences as well, right? There is this deep rooted fear of not being accepted or being judged. And prior to coming out, there is all this kind of anxiety that builds up, right? It's almost like that death-defying leap that you take, and right before you do it, there's that rush of adrenaline, and your mind's going crazy, and you feel like you're on this crazy roller coaster, and then you say the words, and you say I'm gay, or I'm bisexual, or I'm lesbian, or I'm trans, or whatever it is, and it's out there now. You can't take it back. And depending on how the people in your life that you love and respect react to you will determine how you navigate your interpersonal relationships moving forward. Now, I'm not saying that based on that reaction or based on that coming out experience, you are forever changed as a person, but there is a part of you that is going to hold on to that experience. So, if you have a negative experience with your parents, that is what you know. That is what you are familiar with. And those are the people that were supposed to be there to support you and to protect you and to love you and do all of those things. So it's almost like the rug gets swept right out from underneath you. It's also possible that you may have known that they were going to react that way because of your upbringing and certain ideologies and beliefs and all of those things that are taught within the household. But regardless of that, there's still that piece of you that's like, I really wish they would have just accepted me for who I am, because these are people who are supposed to protect me and love me unconditionally. So that becomes a trigger for you. So if you're meeting your partner's parents, is almost like this coming out experience again, where you're being introduced to two people who you're trying to seek their approval and you don't know whether you're going to get it or not. Now, I would hope that your partner would know his parents and understand when the right time is to do it, if there ever is the right time to do it. But regardless, that experience is still scary for a lot of people. And what can end up happening, because you are so anxious and because you are so nervous and because you want to I guess, prove yourself, sometimes you can get defensive. Sometimes you're already looking for them to say something that's going to trigger you or upset you or make you angry. And that's where we get into the don'ts when you're meeting your partner's parents for the first time. So what is the first thing that you do not want to do when you are meeting them for the first time? Do not be disrespectful. It's important to be respectful when meeting your partner's parents. This means being polite, right? Showing good manners, and treating them with respect. Avoid using foul language or cursing or making rude jokes, even if your partner's parents seem to be okay with it, or a little bit more lighthearted, or a little bit more sarcastic, or a little bit funny. Regardless of that fact, it's your first time meeting them. So be on your P's and Q's. Remember that you're meeting them for the first time, like I said, and you want to make a good impression. It's also important to avoid talking about controversial topics, so politics or religion, especially if your views are different from your partner's views. It kind of reminds me of a scene from Bros, if you haven't seen it yet. And if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend going to see it. I want to say that it's on Netflix. It might be on Peacock. I don't think George knows what I'm talking about, but that's totally fine. Bros is a movie that came out not too long ago. Well, maybe about a year ago, but it's a queer movie, and it's really funny. Okay, yeah. So also, if you're a Hallmark watcher, the main actor is in a lot of Hallmark shows. Don't judge me. Actually, I was never super into Hallmark at all, because I was like, oh God, it's all the same stuff. It's like this school teacher who is on like a $15,000 a year budget, but somehow lives in like this whimsical winter mansion and makes cookies on the side and finds the love of her life. And every single one is like the same, but you still get sucked into it. Anyways, so there's a scene in the movie Bros where Bobby meets Aaron's parents for the first time and immediately gets into politics, right? So let's not do that. I also don't want to give away too much of it. If you haven't seen it, just go watch it. It's hilarious. But if you don't get what I'm referencing, watch that movie, watch that scene, and you will be like, oh, okay, this is what he's talking about. Keep the conversation light and friendly and avoid anything that could potentially create conflict or tension. Keep in mind it is possible your partner is just as equally nervous as you are. Now, I also wanted to touch upon something, and I want to touch upon it briefly. I don't want to get super into it, but this is probably going to be controversial for a lot of people. But just because somebody has a different view than you do does not make them a bad person, right? And I think the problem that we are facing now is this cancel culture thing, right? This need to be right in your belief, in your way of thinking. And if nobody else thinks the same way, then they are automatically canceled because it makes you feel dismissed or unseen or unheard. But the reality of the situation is you grow the most when you allow yourself to open your mind and your perspective and your perception on the world in general, right? So if for any reason your partner's parents, let's just say, have different political views than you do, I get why it's important in the sense of legislation, especially as queer individuals, where our life depends on legislation that is passed, particularly within this country. But I have also met individuals who are opposite beliefs of myself, opposite political party, and still support queer rights and all of those things. They may just support the opposite side because of financial reasons or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, if they are a good person overall, if they are understanding, if they are accepting, if they're willing to hear your side, if they're willing to have that conversation with you, don't just brush it off as like, oh no, they have a different perspective or view than I do, therefore this is never going to work. Because if you do that, what you're also doing is you're eliminating a lot of potential, essentially what you're doing is you're potentially throwing away the possibility of a loving, sustainable, lasting relationship with your partner because of your partner's parents' views. It doesn't really make sense. So really take a step back and think about that. Now, the thing here is if your partner's parents have a different view than you do and they do not accept yours and they are very hypercritical and judgmental and all of those things, that is a totally different story. And I understand taking that and saying, I don't necessarily know if this is going to be a good thing for me. But again, I digress. That's a totally different conversation. I just wanted to point that out because it was part of my first point. The second thing to not do is do not be super touchy-feely with your partner in front of his parents. And while it's natural to want to show affection towards your partner and all of those things, it's also important to be mindful of your actions when meeting his parents. Avoid being overly physical with them, kissing, hugging, doing all of that excessively in front of his partners. This can make them uncomfortable. I think it can make a lot of people uncomfortable, even if it's not his parents. Some people are really not into PDA. Granted, should you care what other people think? No. But when it comes to, well, actually, you know what? I take that back. Should you care what people think? The answer is, if their line of thinking affects you negatively and impacts your own personal core values or your ability to live your life freely, then yes, you should be concerned or worried about what they think, because it's important to try to have that conversation to unpack some of these things. But again, whatever. I digress. We're not going to get into that whole thing because this can be a whole different video. But what I am saying to you is you're meeting his parents for the first time. Be very cognizant of how physical you are with your partner. You do not want to give away the wrong impression. And keep in mind, this is their son, right? So it's important to avoid anything that could be perceived as inappropriate or disrespectful, right? So you don't want to be making sexual innuendos or engaging in suggestive behavior. It's you're meeting his parents. And for me, maybe I just come from a bit like of an older school generation. Yes, I'm not super old. I'm 35. I think I'm still considered a millennial. I don't even know what the cutoff point is anymore. But I was raised with more of an old school mentality, right? In regards to showing respect to your elders, being appropriate in a public setting when it comes to making a first impression and all of those things. And I think some of that has kind of just been discarded over the years, unfortunately. But all that to say, if you want to make a good impression with your partner's parents, make sure that you are taking them into consideration when you're meeting them. The third thing that you do not want to do is don't try too hard to impress, right? It's natural to want to make a good impression when meeting your partner's parents, but it's also important to be authentic and true to yourself. Don't try too hard to impress them by pretending to be someone you're not, or by exaggerating your accomplishments or qualities, right? I've seen this situation play out far too many times, and it usually does not end well. If you pretend to be something you're not, it will be very difficult to keep that facade going long term. And it's also important to avoid being too boastful or too arrogant, even if you have a lot to be proud of, right? Remember that your partner's parents are looking to get to know you as a person, and they want to see your true personality and your character. So instead of trying to impress them, focus on being kind, on being respectful, taking an interest in them and their hobbies, taking an interest in getting to know them, asking them questions about their lives and the things that they like to do, and being genuinely curious about their experiences and their perspectives. I don't think that your partner would be introducing you to his parents if he was ashamed of you, or if he thought that you were going to be disrespectful, or if he thought that there was going to be conflict, right? So there shouldn't be that need to feel like you have to overcompensate and act a way that you normally would not. Be yourself, because obviously your partner loves you for who you are and trusts that enough to introduce you to his parents. So again, meeting parents can be super challenging, but if you avoid these things, you can create a positive and respectful impression. So again, remember to be respectful, be mindful of your actions, but also be true to yourself. Don't try too hard to impress them, but instead focus on being kind and genuine and taking an interest in them as well. And by doing this, you can easily create a healthy and fulfilling relationship, not only with your partner, but with your partner's parents. And at the end of the day, that is what you are looking for. At the end of every podcast, I'd like to do a poll or ask questions. So please make sure you are checking that out and you're answering those questions. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to interact with you guys. And again, make sure that you are subscribing to the podcast if you feel like you are getting something out of it. I hope this was educational. I hope this was helpful, insightful, inspiring, whatever it is. I hope that you guys got something from this podcast. If you have any further questions, if you feel the need to book a coaching session because you have issues or you are trying to navigate this and it's very complex and hard for you, reach out to me. There is information that I will provide in the bio of the podcast. I also have social media, TikTok, Instagram. I have a website. I have a YouTube channel. There's multiple different ways that you can reach out to me. Again, thank you for sitting down and having this conversation with me, and I will see you in the next episode.